It's Christmas time. Well, not really. Right now, for me, it's the middle of September. It could be by the time that you're watching this, so who knows? So I'm going to start working on some Christmas gifts. Because, these things take some time, and I want to be able to get them out so that I can get them done in time, instead of handing them out after the fact. This is going to be a good opportunity to use up some scrap material. Scrapwood. It is probably the second biggest internal struggle for a woodworker. The first one is, which tool do I buy next? With all the pieces that you cut off, which ones do you keep and which ones do you throw away? Well, the answer is all of them. You keep all of them. At least that's what my internal struggle is. My internal hoarder says keep them all. But over time, if you don't use up some of this scrap, then you end up with a mess like this. I've been doing some larger projects lately, and those tend to generate the most scrap, especially whenever you have a certain look that you're going for and none of the scrap pieces fit into that look. They go into a pile of, I'll use that for something later. Scrap pieces are good for several uses. They are a great use for test pieces when doing some machine setups, calls and clamping operations, jigs, and so on. Since my scrap pile is taking over my shop, I need to focus on some projects to reduce this pile. Anything that doesn't make the cut of Scrapwood projects is going to meet its fate in the fire pit. In this video, I'm going to make an end-grain cutting board. I have some oak, walnut, and maple that will be perfect. Of course, I know I'm going to get some comments about using oak in a cutting board. Several sources on the internet say do not use oak for a cutting board. If you stick around until the end, I will show you my rationale for why I feel safe using oak in a cutting board and how I treat my cutting boards to keep them safe and not being an issue. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and kick that subscribe button to be notified the next time that I release a new video. So, I'll start by sorting through the pile of pieces that are at least 13/16 square. Once I have enough pieces, I will take them over to the table saw and start ripping them down to 13/16. I will also use some pieces that are 13/16 thick, but wider to vary the pattern a little. Now that I have these pieces ripped to the desired width, I will glue them edge to edge to make a few small panels and then stick them in clamps to dry. Once the glue has had time to dry, I will make a few light passes at the planer to get these panels down to 3/4 of an inch thick. That will remove any of the glue or unevenness whenever these were glued together. Moving over to the table saw with my crosscut sled, I will use my 1-2-3 block to set a stop block at 2 inches, and then I will cut all these panels into 2-inch strips. With all of my strips cut, I will take them over to my assembly table. Here I'm going to play around with the layout to get the most interesting pattern of the material that I have. Then I will lay them out and cover the surface with Titebond 3. I'm using Titebond 3 because these cutting boards get washed a lot. At least they're supposed to. When gluing for a cutting board, you want to make sure that you get good coverage on the entire surface area when you are gluing. If you don't, you will have gaps that will show up whenever the wood contracts. The gaps will close when the wood expands, plus anywhere that you get light on glue, the cutting board is weak there and is susceptible to breaking. Another issue is you can get some food stuck in these gaps, which could lead to a food safety issue. As I'm gluing this section of this cutting board together, I've bitten off more than I can chew. I can't get everything to line up the way that I want it, so I'm going to have to split this into 2 glue-ups instead of trying to do this all in one. When the 2 halves dry, then I will clean up the mating edge, glue them together, and then set that aside to dry. Now it's time to flatten the board. In theory, I could sand this thing flat, but with end grain this would take forever. I'm going to use my flattening jig. My flattening jig is very simple. I made a flattening jig out of some scrap plywood from the Franken desk. You can certainly find more intricate flattening jigs on YouTube, but this one works well enough for my purposes. And then there is the piece that really speeds up this process, and that's the BFRB.
Big frickin' router bit.
This bit is about 2 inches in diameter, so it will remove a lot of material in one pass. You can do this with a regular straight bit, but it will take quite a bit longer. However, it is probably shorter than sanding alone. I'll use some double-sided tape to keep the board from moving while I'm routing it. Then I will set the depth of the bit to remove just enough material to make it flat all the way across. Here goes nothing. I'll move the router toward me and away from me, and then side to side over the jig so that I get a little bit of overlap in each pass. I'll keep doing that until I get all the way across the board. Once I'm done with one side, then I will flip it over and repeat all of these steps on the other side. With both sides flat, now it's time to work on the edges. I could cut this on my crosscut sled. I love my crosscut sled. It is by far the most used jig in my shop. But in this instance, I'm going to use my match fit sled. I don't use this sled as much as I thought I would. It does come in handy. When I ever make a new crosscut sled, I might make it use the match fit hardware rather than putting T-track in it. Now that I've got a good edge, I'll switch back to my crosscut sled and clean up the other edges. The router bit and flattening sled have left some lines on the face of the cutting board, so I'm going to have to do some light sanding, progressing through the grits of 80, 120, 180, and 220. But since the board is pretty flat, I don't have to spend a whole lot of time on each grit. With the sanding out of the way, I want to round over the edges with a 1/4 inch roundover bit to make them a little smoother. Then I'll switch from a roundover to a cove bit and add some finger cutouts on the bottom to make it a little easier to pick up. Now it's time for finishing. There are several solutions out there for finishing cutting boards. In this case, I'm going to use what I believe to be the easiest solution for finishing a cutting board and other wood products that need to be food safe. This one also seems to be the least expensive as well. I start with the cutting board upside down, and then I simply pour mineral oil all over the surface and spread it out to cover the entire surface. As it soaks in, I'll add more. I'll keep doing this until the mineral oil soaks all the way through to the other side of the board. That is how I know that I have enough in the board. You can achieve the same thing by soaking the board in a tub of mineral oil, but I have problems finding a tub that's the right size for each board. Then I have to find something to do with the leftover mineral oil when I'm done. Once the board is filled with mineral oil, I will flip it over just to make sure that I have enough coverage on the top side. Now this is why I feel safe using oak as a cutting board. When you look at the end grain of oak, the pores are fairly easy to see. They are a lot easier to see than the pores of a tight grain wood like walnut or maple. But guess what? It doesn't matter if it's oak, walnut, maple, cherry, or other popular types of wood typically used in cutting boards. When you pour the mineral oil over the end of a tight grain wood, it still soaks through just like the oak. If mineral oil seeps through, juices from food have the potential to do the same thing as well. One of the arguments for oak over tight grain woods is that the open pores will allow more airflow, allowing the board to dry better. So once the board is filled with mineral oil, I'll add board butter to all the surfaces of the cutting board to give it a nice waxy coating to help hold in that mineral oil. I apply a lot to the surface, rub it in the best that I can, and then wipe off the excess. The board butter is made from 4 parts mineral oil and 1 part beeswax. It is important to clean your cutting board with soap and water after every use and when switching from cutting one food to the next. And then after every 3 to 4 meals when you're using your cutting board, reapply the board butter. And then roughly once, twice a year, apply more mineral oil to the board just to make sure that it is not getting filled with anything that you don't want in the board. Also, do not stick your wooden cutting boards in your dishwasher. The excessive heat will destroy them. If you properly maintain your cutting board, they will be nice for years to come. Once all of this is done, the board is ready to use. But I like to add some decorative feet to the bottom just to make it stand off the countertop a little. I'll simply drill a pilot hole and then use a hand screwdriver to screw these down. I wouldn't use a drill to screw these down. You'll probably strip the hole. If you made it this far into the video and you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And hit the like button as well. It really helps the channel. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I'll see you on the next one.